I went from, being this kid. Actually, I was late to the interview, which, you would think that's a done deal. You're not getting the job.
Literally a kid.
I was a kid. I was still we didn't have cell phones like we do today. That's how old I am. And I was driving through, it was like Gaston. I had to find a gas stop to find a payphone. Most people don't even know what that is anymore. So I could call and let them know I was still running late, like trying to figure it out. I finally got there, and man, my car was everybody has their first car. Mine had that fake leather in there. Here I am wearing a suit. It's 185,000 degrees outside because it's Texas. And I come in there, and he asked me a few questions. He says, when can you start? And I said, well, I don't have a job now. I can start anytime. He said, cool. Why don't you get on the phones? I was so excited I got the job. I didn't even think twice about calling my mom and let me know. She had to call them and say, hey, well, I wonder if he's okay. Yeah. Well, it turns out I'm the one that answered the phone. I said, On-Ramp Technology, this is Jeremy McKane. And she goes, well, good. I'm glad you got the job, but least you could do is call your mother.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the NXT Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here today in Dallas, Texas, at the Cumberland Hill office, one of my favorite office places to be. We've got Jeremy McKane. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, well, thanks for having me.
I love doing the research on you. I got a list of titles here: artist, photographer, videographer, director, actionist, which I want to learn more about what that means, but also founder of Ocean Currency Network.
Or OCN.ai, as we tell everybody.
So why don't we start there?
Sure.
Well, not only that, but whatever else it is that you got going on today. Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, it's, first of all, thanks for having me. Yes. This is a very beautiful building.
It is just one of my favorite.
I mean, I grew up here in Dallas. And, passing this building all the time, you're like, well, that sure's a nice building. Never been on the inside until today. And it's probably even nicer on the inside than it's the outside.
Yeah, so it's a school from the 1880s called Cumberland Hill. And the governor of Texas, Clements, had his offices here, from what I understand, for years until they built the tower next door. But as I appreciate it, even with that beautiful tower next door, he continued to have his offices here. And it's just filled with history and this library and memorabilia. And it's a fascinating place.
I can see why. Well, yeah.
And this is our third podcast here, and I have some friends here and partners here. And I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here. So
cool. Well, it's definitely a good place to do this. Well, I've been here for, like I said, I've been here since I was 2 years old. There's an old saying when people say, were you born in Texas? And I said, well, I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I could. But yeah, it seems kind of weird. OCN.ai is a what we like to tell everybody, it's a Fitbit, but for the ocean, right? We analyze enormous amounts of data about the ocean so that we can determine really what's happening. A lot of times you hear about some major catastrophe, and I couldn't help but think, well, gosh, if we had enough data about the ocean, we could process it using all kinds of the tools that we have out there now. Wouldn't it be neat if we could identify an anomaly before it became a catastrophe? Because then we'd have a chance to actually do something about it. Heck, I kind of think about it a lot like you do with weather patterns. I would imagine in the 1800s or so, a lot more people died from tornadoes and extreme weather. But we don't have that problem anymore because we were able to use technology to get people out of harm's way.
So part of what I've read in the research is that of the oceans, only about 4.5% is protected waters right now.
Well, so I'm glad you brought that up. There depends on who you talk to. Now, there's fully protected, and then there's paper protected, and all these kinds of things. I generally kind of wipe everything completely out, because if it's not fully protected, then what's the point? If it was illegal to rob banks, but then the cops would never come, then what does it matter if it's illegal or not? Right. So 2.7 is fully protected right now. And, there's a United Nations mandate underneath what they call the Sustainable Development Goal number 14 to protect 30%. But as you can tell here in 2023, to get to 30 by 2030, we got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and the question is, how do you increase that? How do you grow those percentages? I was fascinated to learn that, some of these waters around island nations, and those waters are used to, harvest food for the people. So if you protect them, you're potentially damaging their economy. So there's ecotourism. I think of going to Cozumel, Mexico, and seeing, the ecotourism there, and then contrasting that and going and scuba diving in Jamaica. I know this is decades ago, but they weren't protected at that point. It was dramatically different.
Yeah, I think to your comment about protecting something and having it affect the local economy of how they feed themselves. There's an ancient practice in the Pacific called tapu. The Hawaiians called it kapu. The Fijians called it tambu. And this is where they would protect an area of water. And several years ago, I was sailing through the Lao group with the paramount chief of the Lao group. And we'd go from island to island, sailing and introducing ourselves and telling them what we do. And I said, as we were walking to this one village, I said, Rokasao, I don't understand this tambu. Sometimes you say you have a tambu, and then other times you say, yeah, we took the tambu away. When we have marine protected areas in the United States, we make a protected area, a sanctuary. It stays protected. We don't unprotect the sanctuary. I said, so how do you do this? He goes, we've been doing this thousands of years. He goes, we go out, we fish, and sometimes the fish is short, sometimes we catch no fish. And then we say, okay, we make tambu. And then we go back, we count fish. Sometimes we have so many fish that we continue to count that we say, okay, we can release tambu now, we go fish. So really what he was talking about back then was a managed fisheries situation. But what they also realized is that when they created these protected areas, that the fishable areas became so abundant, more than what they had before, because it's a give and take. They're allowing the ecosystem to have that balance that it needs. And this is most recently recognized in the marine protected area of Palau. They protected the most amount of any area of any country, and their fish stocks have increased and overabundant of different types of species that in many cases were not there before.
Oh man, it's so fascinating. So I want to back up a little bit and try to find out how a guy from Texas, not touching any water, got to the point where you're so engaged with that right now. But I had read that you were an early entrepreneur and engaged in a startup. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was about 17 years old or so, working at a small little company called On-Ramp Technologies. I was an employee there, and I was maybe the 5th employee. I don't know, it's so long ago, my mind's starting to go. Might have dementia. Hopefully that's not true. But yeah, my job was to help people get on the internet. We were the first dedicated internet service provider in North Texas. And so I went from, being this kid. Actually, I was late to the interview, which, you would think that's a done deal. You're not getting the job.
Literally a kid.
I was a kid. I was still learning. We didn't have cell phones like we do today. That's how old I am. And I was driving through, it was like Gaston. I had to find a gas stop to find a payphone. Most people don't even know what that is anymore. So I could call and let them know I was still running late, like trying to figure it out. I finally got there, and man, my car was it was a little, I mean, everybody has their first car. Mine had that fake leather in there. Here I am wearing a suit. It's 185,000 degrees outside because it's Texas. And I come in there, and he asked me a few questions. He says, when can you start? And I said, well, I don't have a job now. I can start anytime. He said, cool. Why don't you get on the phones? I was so excited I got the job. I didn't even think twice about calling my mom, let me know. She had to call them and say, hey, well, I wonder if he's okay. Yeah. Well, it turns out I'm the one that answered the phone. I said, On-Ramp Technology, this is Jeremy McKane. And she goes, well, good. I'm glad you got the job, but at least you could do is call your mother, So, but that became a really wild ride because within 4 years, we went from 5 people to 400 listed on the NASDAQ. And for a time, we were the world's largest web host provider. And that company eventually got sold to Nippon Telephone and Telegraph out of Tokyo because what they wanted to do is extend their network in the United States. It was cheaper for them to buy our company than it was for them to actually create their own network. And so after a DOJ approval, the merger happened.
And so you ended up working there how long?
I worked there for several years. I started there in I guess it was December of 94, okay. I want to say. And then I might have my dates a little bit off. Yeah. But I think it was 94, and then I left there somewhere around 1997.
Yeah. Now, was there options involved?
There were, and I'm really grateful for that. We kind of joked around in the beginning. We said, what are these options? Those look like Confederate money to me.
Yeah.
But that actually helped me out a little bit.
Well, I mean, you exited as still a very young man, and you had some money.
Yeah, we did. I know it wasn't anything to get crazy excited about, but it was enough for me to really set the trajectory where I'm at today.
Yeah. So what's next after that?
So I thought, well, gosh, it's so easy to get a company on the NASDAQ. I should just give it a go. And it turns out it's not that easy. So if anybody's listening and just says, well, I'll just go start my next company and get listed, there's a lot more labor before the baby. So I went and started a company, and it was moderately successful for a minute, and then I really had some challenges with it. But we were still able to kind of sell it and kind of move on to the next thing. I kind of thought I had my fill, to be honest with you. Yeah. I was like, you know what? I'm just kind of put out. I mean, most of these internet connections that are here, like with the Hunt company, Hunt Oil, and a lot of these, they didn't have dedicated internet. I was usually the one that came out and set them all up. And then I got kind of, I don't know, I just wanted to do something else. And I just decided, I really like taking photos. I really like traveling. My dad and I, we used to take our motorcycles out to West Texas. And so it wasn't about where we were going. It was the journey in between, and I'd stop and take photos. I think I irritated my dad because he really for him, it's always about the destination. I just want to get to the hotel. And I'm like, no, Dad, look there's a rain starting over here, and look at the color on the sky. Eventually, my dad became more of a photographer, even though he was the one that got me into it. And then the two of us would kind of go out through West Texas and taking photos. But man, I really liked the idea of photographing these things that people didn't see. And I think if I look at my entire life and say, well, who is Jeremy? I'm definitely an individual that works hard to make the unseen seen.
Yeah, very cool. And so that interest in photography led you, combined with travel, led you to taking ocean photography and then videography?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I like those kind of Ansel Adams kind of scenes. And the joke I used to tell people was like, I don't like photographing people. I like photographing, buildings and big open spaces because they don't talk back. And then one day, this good friend of mine said to me, he says, Jeremy, I got this fashion show. I wonder if you can come shoot it. It's no can do. I do not want to do that. He said, well, I really need your help. He goes, we got this guy. I don't know if he's going to be good for us. I said, look, if you already got another guy, I don't mind backing up, but I just don't want to do it. My mom was at Estee Lauder. She was in fashion, and I didn't want to be in that world because it's kind of, I don't know. There's things I love about fashion, but then there's the dark side that I don't like, and I didn't want to get wrapped up in it. And so I show up at this thing, and there's all these people there, and he doesn't have that guy that shows up. So I'm the number one guy. I'm like, this is the thing that I didn't want. So I went to find out where the girls were getting ready, and I just really quickly said, okay, hey, look, you're going to see a little piece of tape on the floor. When you get there, you're going to see the flash go off. You guys know how this goes, but I need 2 looks, and then you're off, and then boom, we should be good. So that's what we did. And the girls knew exactly what to do. They were professionals, and we knocked it out, and then I provided all those photos fully edited, ready to go by 6 a.m. the next morning. And they were like, how in the heck did you get all these edited and ready to go? This is great. And they said, well, can you come out to the next one? I was like, I don't know. But one of the things that I really liked was there was a couple different dresses that I thought, man, that would look good underwater. And so I asked them, I said, could I put this underwater? And this one fashion designer. Well, I'm drawing the connection to the ocean. This is why I'm trying to help tell the story arc here. But anyway, long story short is I finally found somebody that was willing to trust me, and I put models underwater. And it would just, for me, even if you didn't have humans, I think what fabric looks like underwater is just unbelievably beautiful. But I got real bored of just shooting in a pool. I mean, it was fun, it was pretty, but after a while, it's all the same. Yeah. I was like, how cool would it be if I did this in the ocean? And I would put girls in the shore break, and I mean, all kinds of really cool looking views. And then I kept getting bombarded with plastic. I kept getting plastic bottles and nets and all this stuff. And I was like, well, somebody should do something about this because this is horrible. And I never once thought, well, I'm an artist. I've got a platform. Maybe I could be that somebody.
Yeah, that is so cool. I'm freaking out because we had a guest on our podcast that aired just 2 weeks ago, maybe. When this airs, it would have been a couple of months. And he does this underwater photography that you were doing this, 20 years ago?
No, I started with the underwater photography. I started really professionally, maybe 2007.
Okay. So 15 years. So, so I hadn't really heard of it before. And so a second time in just a matter of weeks. So, very interesting. But, so that's what led you to the ocean.
Yeah. Well, because I think, you're like, okay, well, you're going to do something. What are you going to do? And that was a hard part. It's like trying to figure out, well, what's that tangible thing, right? Everybody that's listening to this right now, every single one of you got a superpower. There's something you do better than anybody else. The question is, how do you use that superpower targeted at a very specific thing? So I was looking at what I knew my superpower was then, and how do I focus on getting this crap out of the ocean? And so that was kind of the first and foremost kind of initial thought that I had.
Okay, so there's the problem defined, right? And then what was the process of coming up with these solutions? Because it seems like a pretty big
it's huge
gap there.
It's huge, and you know what? I didn't have clue one how I was going to do it. I got a call from this guy Cyril Gooch from Parlay for the Oceans. This would have been around 2015. And he's this, he was really trying to create more awareness about plastic in the oceans and what can be done, which is why I was interested in his group. And he calls me up one day. He's a very thick German accent. He goes, Jeremy, you need to come to Paris for the Paris Agreement. And I was like, man, I don't know who you think I am, but I don't just get on planes and go to Paris. Like, I've never even been to Paris. And he goes, we've got to make the oceans cool. And I want you to show you the artwork that you make. And I was like, yeah, okay, well, if I can work it out, I'll work it out. And talked to my wife, and she's like, I don't know, Paris? What do you need to go there for? What are you going to get out of it? I don't know. And a good friend of mine from California called me up. She said, what's going on? And I told her about the conversation. She's like, you're going, right? When are you going? I said, I'm not going. She says, yes, you are. She goes, if I have to get on a plane to Dallas, kidnap you, throw you on a plane to Paris, you're going. And I'm like, well, all right, I'll just see what it is. And so I made it happen. And so I get there, and I will say, like, you remember how I was talking about that pinnacle moment when I was at On-Ramp and everything changed and I was able to do some pretty amazing entrepreneurial stuff? This is the moment from an environmental and entrepreneurial. This is the moment that this thing really came together. I go to this party at COP21. For those of you who don't know, COP21 is the Conference of Parties, most famously referred to, or infamously, depending on what side of the line you're on, as the Paris Agreement. And I was interested in going there because I realized that the Paris Agreement didn't have teeth. And they had been for years trying to figure out how to just make sense out of things and get everybody on the same page. And this was the first time that, even though it didn't have teeth, it got people on the same page. And
so they're there to talk about the issues. They're just...
Well, they're there to convene, to talk about strategies moving forward, about what the next goal was. And the goal for COP21 was to keep emission or carbon or the overall planet rather at 1.5 degrees, no greater. That was the plan. And so, but they weren't talking about the oceans at that time.
I see.
And I'm like, how in the heck are you going to talk about climate change if you're not talking about the oceans, which is the greatest tool that we have to sequester carbon and mitigate the temperature of the planet? And that became kind of real evident to me in that state. But it was that party that Cyril had invited me to. I met all these amazing human beings: Dr. Sylvia Earle, Captain Paul Watson from Sea Shepherd. Met celebrities who were also focused on these kinds of things. And I started to see a thread, a golden kind of thread that linked everybody together. And I don't think I knew at the time how things would roll out. But I will say, looking back, hindsight's always 20/20. That was the moment where I kind of went into hyperspeed.
So it became a little clearer there that the ocean played a role, or should play a role. Wasn't at that point, but it became clear to you that that's where your focus should be.
Yeah, I mean, the ocean's always played a role. Whether the humans recognize it or not is another story.
Right.
There's this little thing that I learned back then, this magic little smallest entity that lives here on the planet that's the most important thing for us. It's called Prochlorococcus. And, you could even say that Prochlorococcus is your sponsor for your show today, because if it weren't for Prochlorococcus, we wouldn't be breathing. And so it's nice that we can breathe and sit here in this lovely building and talk about this subject. But that is one of the key elements in the ocean. And when the ocean's working, it's healthy. I like to tell kids that whales are important because they poop and they feed Prochlorococcus, and Prochlorococcus through light and all the other natural elements through photosynthesis creates every second breath that we're breathing right now. So when I started to kind of see that back then, I realized, okay, well, I can create artwork, I can create awareness and share with people how important this is, so they'll want to do something within their own lives. But even more, all of that really drew me to the idea as I realized that we didn't really measure or gather data from the ocean to really understand its true potential, and that's really what led me to create this company. But then you run into the problem: cool idea. How are you going to make money?
Right.
And so I recognized really quickly that there were a number of different risks that were attached to the ocean, whether it's you're a developer, you could be a bank, you could be an insurance company. Risk assessment is a big business. That's one angle. Academia is always looking for research. They're trying to reduce the overall cost of what that research could be. We could do that for them. And then in the carbon markets, as carbon prices are being determined, we could help educate the market of exactly how much value that ecosystem service value is. Meaning, if I have seagrass, what is its value in sequestering out carbon and generating oxygen, and how quickly does it do that? And when we know those factors, then we know really where we are in the grand scheme of things. Are we generating too much carbon? Are we allowing the ocean to catch up? It's like balancing your checkbook. Well, we don't have to do that anymore. I'm giving my age away again. But you don't spend more money than what's in the bank.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when it comes to carbon and some of the things that we're doing, it's not that I don't have a problem with generating carbon. I just don't want to spend more than what I got.
We would like to thank Castro Real Estate Services for sponsoring the NXT Entrepreneur Podcast. Castro Real Estate Services is a full-service real estate brokerage firm based in Baton Rouge. They can handle commercial and residential transactions in Baton Rouge and the surrounding areas. Need to buy or sell real estate? Call the company that cares about you. Castro Real Estate. Turnkey Solutions is a nationwide cybersecurity and IT systems expert, providing the services that growing businesses need to stay ahead of hackers, hurricanes, and IT nightmares. With 24/7 support teams and offices across Louisiana and Texas, they bring peace of mind to companies of all sizes. Their 5-star rated team provides lightning-fast IT support with the cybersecurity and business continuity solutions today's businesses demand. When you're looking for a technology partner to provide you with peace of mind, find out more by calling them at 225-224-6594 or chat with them online at www.tks.la/NXT. My interest was fish identification, tropical fish identification.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would dive with these flip cards.
Right.
And, there may be 150 fish running back. But I could identify a couple of hundred fish underwater. And I always thought, I could have been a marine biologist. I always think, well, I could have done this or that. Marine biology was...
I'm the same way. In fact, I tell the scientists that I work with that are on my team, I say, I'm not a scientist, but I'm a last mile scientist. I take all your work and I get it out to the masses so everybody can use it.
You're coming out of Paris Agreement and you've made this magical connection, and you realize that your art, which was displayed there, had the power of bringing awareness.
Yeah.
And so that was like the next step.
Well, right? Yeah, because I can get on a TED stage and I can talk about all this stuff. I can give you facts and figures, but that's just my words coming to you.
Right.
If I created an artwork that tells a story and that you experience, what you learn becomes your words, not my words. And I feel like sometimes we need to experience things to really decipher how we feel and if we should do something.
And so you did this through a project called LUCID.
Yeah.
So tell us about LUCID.
It was named LUCID because of the dreaming state where you're in a dream and you feel like you have control. You can do something. That's why I named it that way. But I had met this guy in Chile years ago. His name was Alexei Rubinov. And someone had told me that he had this technology where he could control computers with his brain. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I've heard everything in the world, whatever. And so I meet this guy, and he tells me, he goes, he's a Ukrainian guy. He's like, no problem. I bring you my device, and you can control light with mine. Just think on, off, and light will come on, light will go off. And I'm like, all right, whatever. So he comes the next day, and sure enough, he said, look, just kind of put yourself in a mindfulness state, and then when you see this light turn to yellow or green, when it hits green, just think on or off, and that will actually control the switch for the light. And it worked. And I thought, wow, that's so cool. What are you going to do with this? And he said, well, I want home automation, this, and he had these interesting ideas. And I said, well, what if we use this as a way to get people to think differently about the effects of our planet? Actually, what's funny, one of the things he told me, he said he wanted to do, I said, well, where do you see this going in the future? He says, I want to be on the first manned mission to Mars. That way, astronauts can be on chemically induced dream state. They can control spacecraft all the way to Mars. And I was like, cool. I like that idea. However, before we get to Mars, why don't we try to figure out how to take care of the planet that we're already on? And so we agreed to partner up. He did all the algorithms for the neurofeedback systems. And so I took my artwork, which were videos that I had collected from all over the Pacific, and I would focus on plastic trash and horrible things that I had seen. But then I also had humpback whales and sharks and these beautiful things that are in the ocean. The idea is that we have some problems, right? But there's still a lot that we have to fight for. And so if you could clear your mind, be in the present moment, we would measure your brainwaves in a near real-time basis. And what would happen is that you would see a shift where the plastic would fade away, and now you'd see a humpback whale.
So you're at a maybe a gallery somewhere that has this lucid show going on.
That's how I envisioned it. Actually, I had it on my computer when I was in Paris, and I was showing this one guy, and he was like, this is amazing. And Marcus Thryman was his name, from TBA 21. And they're an art foundation, and he really helped accelerate this. In fact, he introduced it to the German ministry in the G7 Presidential Summit. And I didn't know anybody from Berlin at the time. So I kept getting these calls on my cell phone from a Berlin number, and I'm like, who is this? And I kept hanging up on it. Finally, I was so irritated. This number keeps calling me. I answered it. This guy's on the phone. He's like, hello? And And I was like, yes, this is Jeremy. And he's like, I understand you have an artwork that maybe you control with mind about these plastics in the oceans. And I was like, yeah. And then I realized, oh, these must be the folks that Marcus were talking about. And I've been hanging out the whole time. I profusely apologized. And he was very nice. But we co-designed a shipping container that had these video screens in them. That way they could be put together and go to another city. And so they traveled Europe for 3 years. And you have guests that were walking in for free. They put the headset on and they were able to use Lucid and do this thing. And it was all about plastic pollution and where it comes from and how it integrates into the ecosystem. And I was really excited because, as an artist, here was one of my installations going to Hôtel de Ville in Paris. And I was like, wow, as an artist, I've always wanted to have something in Paris. And here it is in front of like this, all these people in this massive space. And so for me, that was a big deal. And then my family came, but that wasn't the big deal. The big deal was when it went to Brussels. All the members of parliament had come through there. And at one point, Stefan, the guy who was the one putting it all together, he said, a lot of people have made comments about how they didn't realize how big of a problem plastic was in the environment. And that there's been a number of bills that have come, but they just never see the floor because, quite honestly, there were bigger problems. So they thought. And he said, he goes, it's interesting because at least their minds are open to this. Well, as it would turn out, about 8 months later, there was a bill that actually made it to the floor of the European Parliament to ban all single-use plastics by 2021, with the exception of plastic bottles, I believe. And it was a unanimous ban. That affected over 500 million people in the European Union. And so while I don't think that I had anything to do with it, I definitely think that what I said earlier about art having its capability of not having my words transmitted to them, but they were able to experience something, so that became their experience. So that when they saw that bill, maybe they thought a little bit differently about plastic and what it's actually doing in our environment. So this is an example of why I think using art, and if there are artists that are listening to this, think about ways that you can use your art in a matter of storytelling, because that's all we have as humans. Look, I've talked to you about entrepreneurship today. I've talked to you about being an artist, but at the end of the day, every single one of us has a story. And the question is like, how does that story integrate and be an added value to the next human that you run into?
Yeah, that is so fascinating, Jeremy. I'm loving this. So you have this interactive exhibit, Lucid.
Mm-hmm.
It's going around Europe.
Yeah.
Right? At the same time, you have your other side of your art business, if you will. You have these beautiful still images, big, beautiful pieces of work.
Which, by the way, they come and go. And like sometimes they'll sell, and then other times months will go by, nothing. It's a very weird business, by the way. So I always say, while they sell and they do well, when they do well, I mean, what keeps me going is the fact I just absolutely love making stuff.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I was curious when I looked at some of your images, like you'll do maybe 10 or 15 or 20 of a series.
Yeah.
What is the logic there? That's what you perceive to be the...
Well, I wasn't getting in the business of just selling prints the rest of my life. I like getting in the water. And people who buy my artwork, they're essentially, helping support me and going on some of these expeditions. I'm actually I'm an Explorers Club member, and I would use a lot of those funds to be able to focus on various expeditions. Like one year I was, chasing down humpback whales to be one of the first people, hopefully, to document a calving. Because we've never photographed a humpback whale giving birth. So how do you fund something like that? I don't want to go around town begging for money and saying, hey, would you pay for my trip out to Tonga? But it'd be really cool if people just, bought artwork and does the same thing. At least you get something out of it. And so I think, artwork had a way of kind of being a tool for me to generate an income, to do what I really loved. But that also, I think it helped me grow as an individual to realize, the trajectory of where I needed to go to find that superpower, right? To find out, where can I focus it to make the most amount of impact?
Yeah, it's fascinating when you consider how much travel you've done, just the countries that you've mentioned here. The accents that we've collected are awesome.
Well, I'm a dad.
Yeah.
So I believe, I've got two girls, they're 9 and 13 now, but ever since they were little, I've read all of their books in different accents.
Yeah.
Some of them I have made up so that the story becomes interesting. And I remember Nazara, my eldest, at one point when she would read the story, she also read them in accents. So, when you're a dad and, you're just as tired as they are, you've got to try to keep it interesting so that you can at least stay up and not fall asleep in the middle of the story. Yeah,
you told the story about that interactive exhibit where you see the video of the trash. And there's another one that I love doing the research. And I guess it's similar. It says that you're pulling this data from drone. It identifies the pollution, digitizes it, and injects it into a JPEG in a hex form.
Oh, right.
Which I got instantly. I knew immediately what that meant.
Yeah. Oh, well, I can explain it pretty simply. That was an installation that I had an idea. It was during the pandemic. I was trying to think about how can we tell a story. So there's a lot of data that we have on satellite feeds, and you can have access to it for free because we're taxpayers. We can have access to that NASA data. And I thought, well, how cool would it be if I were to take that data and then say, hey, look, there's this one spot. It's not so good. And what if I could actually say where that location was and put it into a hex format, right? Which is when you open up your JPEG image, right? Well, what it's all doing in that JPEG is it's telling you pixel by pixel what color it should be so that you see that image. And if I change one of those variables, then it's going to change the color, which means it's going to look wrong. And it's going to glitch the image, which is why the installation was called Glitch. But I kind of thought about it a lot like, remember E.T.? When E.T. was sick, the flower started to die, and when he felt better, the flower came back up. I'm like, well, what if I could do the same thing with artwork where I could digitally destroy one of my pieces of work based off of the environmental variables that exist? But when we started to do better, the artwork would slowly restore but if only it got better.
Yeah.
And that was the whole premise behind Glitch.
Yeah, that's just... It's so interesting. Okay, so at what point you're doing all your interactive work, you're doing your photography, videography is something you had done, but at what point does ocean become a thought in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that maybe 2017, there was kind of this craze about cryptocurrency and all these kinds of things. And originally, I liked the idea of having a currency that was, of course, well, let me just say this first. Here in Texas, maybe other places too, we've got a saying, man plans, God laughs. And I felt like there was a lot of laughing, right? And I thought, well, especially when it came to like Bitcoin, people were like, what's a Bitcoin worth? How do you know? And I was able to kind of distill an answer to define to anybody who'd never touched it before what a Bitcoin was worth. But then that was when I realized that we could probably do better. Right. I wanted to be able to say, what if a market cap could be defined by, the environment, and then divide that value by the total number of tokens? That was an initial idea that I thought was kind of cool, but I still don't think that that's the highest and best use of some of these technologies. So the OCN.ai really became, like I said, a Fitbit for the ocean. How do we... I have all these things like on my watch here is this Garmin watch. It's also my dive computer, but it turns out it measures all stress levels and heart rate and all these other kinds of things. I got one of these Oura rings. It measures all kinds of stuff. I like measuring things in case you hadn't noticed. But what's interesting is the 2 times that I've had COVID, this Oura ring has told me 3 days before I had any symptoms. It said, "Are you feeling okay?" And I was like, uh-oh. And it does this because it measures just slight adjustments that might be a problem. And that's what I felt really needed to happen in the ocean. If we could measure slight little things that change that could lead us to a potential catastrophe, wouldn't it be nice to know, like right before it, let's say you get a little tickle in your throat, you might be getting a sore throat, you start taking a bunch of vitamin C's, and your sickness isn't as bad as it would have been had you just let it run its course. That's kind of what we're wanting to do. We want to know when to put the vitamin C into the ocean, so to speak. But we only can do that if we take enormous amounts of data collection. So I realized that right around that time. because everybody was in that crypto craze. I kind of went the opposite direction, and I wanted to focus on blockchain because I wanted to have an element of helping define what is the truth without having to depend on a single source. And that was really where what changed everything.
It's interesting to consider how you can wrap your mind around something that is that large, that much data, that much of the world's surface.
Yeah.
How do you start?
Well, as Dad would say, it's like eating an elephant, which is a horrible thing to say. You start one bite at a time. But when I was in third grade, my teacher, Mrs. Drews, told us that we had a hole in the ozone layer, and that's a big problem. It's probably one of the biggest problems I could think of at the time. How are you going to fix that? And what causes it? Well, that's the first thing. If you want to improve something, you got to first measure it. Well, chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, that's what was creating a good majority of the hole in the ozone layer. But, politicians, scientists, local communities, they all got together and they said, well, maybe we can find something else to use other than CFCs. And a concerted effort happened globally, not just in a single area. And guess what? We have now solved that problem. We don't have the hole in the ozone layer. It's going to be closed, I think, like 2025 by current projections. So when you look at that, you say that's a big problem. How do you fix it? Well, it starts by, there was political action, there was community willpower. Going back to that thing I said earlier, people realized what their superpowers were. They focused it on one thing, and they were able to make the impossible possible. In fact, Richard Branson once said, "It's only impossible until the first guy does it."
Why don't we talk about Mr. Branson?
Sure.
Because you have spent time at Necker Island.
I have.
And there's different summits and conferences. It sounds like you've attended there. What are those, and how did those work out?
Yeah, so I co-founded something called Ultramarine Ocean Action Summit on Sir Richard Branson's island, Necker Island, as you mentioned, with my friend Susie Mai. And the purpose there was I felt like, going to the UN and seeing all these meetings and stuff, I happened to notice something. It was a little bit of a magic moment where in those negotiating meetings, they're not always the most effective, right? Sometimes there's a lot of fighting, and it's very chaotic, and at least from my humble seat that I often sit in, right? That I'm not a negotiator, I'm not a politician. As we'd say here in Texas, I don't have a dog in that fight. Which is another horrible thing. Why do we have all these bad sayings? These are horrible. But what I did notice was magic happening in the hallways, where people were kind of talking to artists. They were talking to entrepreneurs and people that weren't those high-level negotiators, and really cool things, collaborations came out of that. So about 6 years ago, I sat down with Richard and I said, what if we could bring artists, philanthropists, business leaders, scientists, and politicians, put them in one room and say, we have one job. How do we protect 30% of the ocean by 2030? And how do we hold people's feet to the fire with tangible tasks in 12-month rolling cycles? And Richard was like, I think that's a brilliant idea. You should do it here on Necker. And so we have. We just finished our 5th year in January. We had 92 people on island. We had finance people who maybe they had successful exits, or maybe they ran a hedge fund, or but they were looking to do something impact driven. And anybody that knows me knows that if I'm going to talk to you about climate change and all these kinds of things, I'm not going to talk to you from the standpoint of like, write me a check and we're going to go save the world. I want to find tangible financial reasons to do something from a business perspective that yields a return, because that's one of the things that we talk a lot about on Necker, and I think Richard would definitely agree if he was sitting here with us that that business is the answer out of this particular problem.
What an interesting guy he is, and read several of his books. But just the fact that you were able to engage with him and have 5 years of summits at Necker it's really amazing.
It's a fun place. When I first did the first one, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist sometimes, and so I put all the content in the way. Get up in the morning, go have breakfast, and then we'd have some panels, and we'd have lunch, and then we have some more panels, and then we go do something for a little bit, and then come back for dinner. And Richard was like, do you happen to have an agenda? And I was like, oh yeah, here it is, Richard. This is what we're going to do. And I was so excited because it was like the first time I'd really put something together. He's like, right. I'm looking here. It says that you've got some panels after lunch. Oh yeah, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about that. Right. Yeah. So on Necker, we work really hard in the morning, but we play even harder in the afternoon because that's where the magic happens. Oh, right. Oh, yeah, I guess I can fix that. And so I went back and just frantically removed everything, thinking like, what an idiot. Of course, that's what he would say. And I will tell you, he's absolutely right, because in the mornings, I do all the kind of the very kind of business-like, panels that you would expect. And that is the seed for conversation that happens in the afternoon. You'll find people in the hot tub. Maybe they might go do some other thing somewhere else, might go feed the lemurs. Who knows, whatever it is that they're going to do. But the people that end up coming together and having a conversation, they're talking about the things that they want to work on together as a team based on what they heard. And we've had more impact because of the playtime than we ever would have had having panels and having people just listen, and drone on.
Absolutely brilliant. I love that. What great stories. We would like to thank MBD Automation for their support of the NXT Entrepreneur Podcast. MBD Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, end users, in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. MBD Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If MBD Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. This podcast is sponsored by Mayhall, Fondren Blaze, a Louisiana business litigation firm offering sophisticated legal advice that is tailored to meet the needs of their individual clients, including a wide variety of litigation, complex business negotiations, corporate formations, closings, and title examination. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the expertise of MFB, a Louisiana practice made for business. Learn how we can work with you at www.mfbfirm.com.
We're in a pilot program right now, and essentially what I wanted to do is that, I recognize that when we create a marine protected area or a sanctuary, we're essentially telling locals that they can't fish there anymore, where previously that's how they maybe just fed their family, not even sold anything. And I thought, well, let's figure out a way around that so that they can provide for their family. But I kind of think about, what if I could create tools that could collect data that could be sold? So maybe those same fishermen, they have those experiences and the tools that they need to be out at sea. Today, they're fishermen of fish pulling, dead bodies out of the ocean and for value. But maybe in the future, we could turn the business model around to where they're pulling data from the ocean and they're getting paid for that. They're still out there. They're still doing what they know how to do. They're just doing it in a different way.
And so that could in the model, that could get paid for by the purchasers of the data.
Right. So when we look at who would buy this data, we say, first of all, as an academic doing an expedition out at sea, they're spending diesel fuel. They've got people that are on there. They got to get fed. There's a chef. There's this boat that's just kind of trolling through looking. They have a good idea of where they probably need to be, but they're spending a lot of money doing it. And if we had a mesh network of all these data collectors that would identify a potential anomaly and say, hey, something's just not quite right over here, they could spend 2/3 of less money. Instead of wandering the ocean, they could go to the exact spot, use all of their tools and expertise that they know how to do to really tell a compelling story. So that is one model. The other would be risk assessment. If I'm a commercial developer and I'm building a hotel, and all of a sudden something happens, I'm leaking stuff into the ocean and I'm destroying coral reefs, well, wouldn't I as a developer like to know that I have a potential risk that needs to be mitigated before a major catastrophe happens and I have a class action lawsuit? So that's another revenue stream. And I think the third, probably the most exciting one for me, is what we are now referring to as the blue carbon markets. And these are markets that not just are related to carbon credits, but also biodiversity credits, that those funds are used to be able to protect certain areas so that the ocean can have a second to rebound and grow. You remember I talked to you about that party in Paris. Well, I sat down to this lovely lady. Her name is Dr. Sylvia Earle, and she told me about a place called Cabo Pulmo. And she said, it was in Mexico. They almost had no fish, no sharks. And sharks, by the way, are an indicator of a healthy ecosystem. The more you see as a diver, you know this. She said there was none of that. So again, remember how you said, how do you solve a big problem? And you start one bite at a time. I'm going to destroy that line. We got to come up with another one. We really do. But the local fishermen said, yeah, we got to protect it. No one comes in or out of here. Politicians did the same thing. It just went around for 15 years. No one came in or out of that area. Well, except for the fish. Dr. Sylvia Earle goes back and dives the site. She says, Jeremy, that water was like I remember 50 years prior, and it had only been protected for 15 years. So it goes to show you that humans, when removed from the situation, give the ocean the capability to completely rebound. And that really motivated me. I thought, well, how do we use technology to understand if we're actually making a difference, and can we make that impact? But then we also need to make a business around it so it can be financially viable. Because I don't believe in charity. I believe in charity, don't get me wrong, but in this case, not here. If this is going to work on a global scale, it needs to be a business.
An economic model.
That's right.
It's sustainable.
That's right.
Okay, so Mako is what?
So Mako is one of the products. So we did an MOU with a company called iSensus. They had been doing autonomous vessels for the U.S. government, and they're just really sharp guys. And I said, I want to preface this in saying that, OCN.ai is a software company, but just like Tesla tells everybody they're a software company, they make hardware, obviously. There is necessity that breeds invention, and sometimes we need to get different types of data. So iSensus was a really good partner in that sense. And so they took an autonomous, they took a jet ski, made it fully autonomous. Why is that exciting for me? Well, I can put all kinds of really cool scientific sensors. I can send this thing out for weeks at a time in different areas that doesn't have people on them, and I can conduct all kinds of really cool assessments. And really,
they can make them like solar powered?
This one is not solar powered. It runs, it's got electric, for all the gadgets on it, but it's a gas engine essentially.
Okay. It knows when to come in and.
Yeah, you have a number of things, but I think it's a good tool. I don't think it's the tool, right? And again here, I guess my dad's going to love this podcast because here I am using all his phrases, but he used to talk about people, and he said, people are like tools in a toolbox. You wouldn't pull out a screwdriver to drive a nail into the wall. I mean, you could do it, you'll get the job done eventually, but you're going to be hating life. Why don't you just pick up the hammer and just hit it one time and get it in the sheetrock? Well, that's kind of how I look at the Mako. The Mako can help us really identify some of these big threats that are happening in the ocean. Maybe there's a vessel that needs to be identified. There's all kinds of really cool things that we could do with it. But we built something called the Seamore, spelled SEAMORE, which is a smart buoy that's fractions of the cost of what anything else is out there. And with that smart buoy, we can measure over 14 different water quality data points and transmit them live via satellite so that we can detect when there's something that could be a problem. And what I really want to know is that marine environment, is it conducive to biodiversity increase? Because if it is, guess what? I have a price for a whale. I have a price for seagrass. I have a price for mangroves. And I can put all of that together, and I can go to a government. I can say, if you protect these things, the ecosystem service value might be $100 million per year. Like, I'll give you an example. If I had 1 hectare of mangroves, just 1 hectare, that's $11,000 worth of ecosystem service value that would be paid to that government every single year. So now we're looking at these nature-based assets as if they were employees in a factory working and generating an income for us because they're moving things around in such a way that creates value. But we'll never really know their true potential if we don't measure it. And that's why we exist.
So when you look at countries that do ecotourism well, this would benefit them as much as
it's completely separate. Ecotourism really relies on the fact that the ecosystem's healthy, and then tourists come to go visit those places. Right. But as they say in these regions, when the wind blows, the tourist goes. And how do we create an entire economic model that is non-dependent on tourism in the next pandemic, in the next major hurricane? There are a lot of countries in the Caribbean right now. If there's a hurricane that hits at the magnitude that we saw with Maria, they're done for. It's over. So how do we create a new system? And I'll tell you something right now, a good example about what's going to change all of this. This is the moment where, when I'm talking to you right now, this is the moment when Henry Ford told people that they wanted this black goo because there was value in that black goo. Why? Because he wanted to move his car around, as my friend Ralph Chami says. We're at that moment now in the carbon markets and the biodiversity markets because we start to see the value. Yes, you're right. From an ecotourism standpoint, I'm going to want to go to the places where they're thriving. So it will. But even if those tourists don't come, we still need to make sure that there's revenue that's attached to it. And so the Bahamas, as an example, is sitting on 30% of the world's seagrass. Do you know what the world's seagrass value is right now?
I do not.
$2 trillion. $2 trillion is the ecosystem service value of seagrass on the global market. The Bahamas is sitting on 30% of that. Here's a country that potentially has $660 billion worth of assets now. We start thinking about this. We're like, wait a second. Can we take traditional financial instruments? Can we leverage them? Can we create, all these different types of tools that we would typically use in other types of assets? And the answer is yes. But the difference between these assets and, say, gold or something else, it's that, fish have sex, they procreate, which means that you have an exponential growth pattern that needs to be calculated. And so this is the sole reason why I wanted to work with Ralph Chami. He's working with us on this project in the BVI. And he's a IMF executive assistant director who's been there for 25 years. He's currently on sabbatical because he realized how beautiful these whales were. He went whale diving, and he said, "What's the value of a whale?" And it's about, I think he said it's $2 million over the course of its life is its ecosystem service value. He also did one for an African elephant because somebody asked him about elephants. He said, "What's an elephant worth?" The answer is $2.6 million, and they live to be about 60 years old. And so let's break this down. If you're an African villager and you have only one job to make sure that that elephant is protected, he doesn't get killed, then you could take, because that elephant doesn't need the money. He's okay. He's going to live his life. You would get $40,000 theoretically in this thought experiment. You get $40,000. That's a billionaire to an African villager. And so we start looking at that and we start compounding these things, and we look at this and we say, wow, there's a whole new market here. There's a whole new concept of what can be. And so, we really think that that's great, but at the same time, I want to be very careful that these things are not double sold, or that just because you have seagrass here doesn't mean it's sequestering the carbon that you think it does. Can we measure that, prove it with science, and then transmit that back to the markets? And from there, say, hey, here's your report. Just like when you go into E-Trade, you look at your investments, you see how they've been doing performance analysis. Well, we should have a performance analysis for ecosystem services as well. And that's really the core of our business.
So when businesses or people buying carbon credits,
right,
that's
right now.
That's how that
right now. And you're going to see this in biodiversity credits. You're going to see this in a number of different places. But Microsoft, as an example, has a commitment to essentially draw down all of the carbon that they've put into the atmosphere since 1975. It's about $3 billion, if I'm not mistaken. So that's great. So if I was Microsoft and I'm handing over $3 billion, which, by the way, is no chump change, that's a lot of money, I want proof. I want to know that, in fact, it's doing as advertised, which is very important. And number two, I want to make sure that the local communities that are in fact the guardians or the people who are looking over this, I want to make sure that they're getting paid so that my investment, if you will, is going to be protected over a period of time.
Man, that's fascinating. It's such big thought and new thought to me, these ideas that you're coming up with. But like you said, it's kind of the Henry Ford analogy where you got to start.
Yeah, I stole that from Ralph. He always opens with that. I'm like, Ralph, that's genius.
But I'm thinking of you in the swimming pool, photographing women and
right.
and
guys too, equal opportunity here.
Yeah. Could you ever have imagined that you would end up working with the people that you are today on the magnitude of the projects that you're on today?
I mean, isn't that how life is? Like, you look behind and you can see all the footsteps you've taken, but it's kind of hard to see the footsteps as you're looking through the fog.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've kind of learned about creatives is they just keep creating, right? And they're continuously in pursuit, because creativity is life. I mean, that's what drives them. And when you're continually pursuing something like that, which is creative but also intellectually based and environmentally based, it's amazing.
Yeah, but here's the thing, man. I'm just some ordinary Texas guy.
Yeah.
I just said, hey, I want to get my hands dirty. Everybody that's listening to this right now has this exact same capability. You just got to get off your butt and do something.
So everyone in the room who thinks Jeremy is an ordinary Texas guy, raise your hand, please.
No, I'm serious. I'm dead serious. Well, because think about it. It's like, I think it was Mark Cuban once said, your ideas are worth nothing. What you get paid for is your execution. Mostly, all these people say, well, hey, I'd love to tell you about my business idea, but you got to sign an NDA first. I'm not signing your stupid NDA, because at the end of the day, the thing I've learned is that people don't want to work. They don't want to execute, right? So I can tell you all the things and how I do it all day. When you find out how much work it is, you're going to be like, well, I'll just go to McDonald's. That's a lot easier.
So perfect time to bring up activist versus actionist. Tell us that.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I'm sure someone else came up with the word actionist. I just can't remember who it was. But I've always thought negatively about activists, because I felt like there was a lot of noise and nothing. It's like, what is it, Elvis used to say? A little less conversation, a little bit more action, please. Like, come on. Like, I'm going to pick on Greta Thunberg for a little bit. I like her, by the way. I really like her. I like her because she's pushed people into an uncomfortable space. But then where do you go from there? Right. And of course, you can't expect a young woman like herself to have the answer where to go. But I think when we look at a global perspective of what needs to be done, people need direction. There are people who are leaders and there are people who are followers. Most people are followers, right? Which is okay. You can't have a bunch of captains in a ship. None of them want to row the boat. Right, you gotta have people that are willing to follow and be part of a team, and I think sometimes that's me too. I want to know what I can do. So if you have any ideas, great, let's go. If you do have a great idea, well, then your job is to put that out there. So I feel like what Greta did was she got a lot of people ruffled, but then at the same time, I feel like a bunch of people went and marched in the street, and the next day they went and used all their single-use plastic. Where is the target? Where is the issue? And I feel like taking a lot of that energy and focusing on, I like to pick on Starbucks as an example, right? This is something we all know. And Starbucks, if you're listening to this, there you go. You guys got the Starbucks there too. It's okay. No, it's still fine. It's not anything bad about the company. This is just a thought experiment. If I said to you, they recently did this thing where they said, well, we're not going to have any plastic straws, which is good, awesome. But instead, they're just going to put a plastic lid on top of the thing anyway. It's about the same amount of plastic. I don't know. The point I'm trying to make here is that when people go to Starbucks, they go there for the coffee, I'm pretty sure. And if you change the overall mechanism that you have, like, no one's going to come in there and say, gosh, you know what? I really wanted that plastic lined paper cup. Can you get me one of those? No, They just came in, so you could come up with some new thing that's better for the environment, and I'd still get that coffee. In fact, I'd probably pay more for it because you've done this new thing. So I don't think that the onus always is on the consumer. If the CEOs and the boards of these big, massive companies could make one simple decision, then it would trickle effect through millions of people around, if not billions of people around the planet. So yes, we need to do our part. Our decisions only go so far, and I feel like we need to target very specific things. And if we can do that, be very clear about that, I think we can get our way out of this. Again, no disrespect to Greta. I do like her, but I just feel like, some of these activist conversations need to be organized. So that's why I like the word actionist. When we did our event on Necker Island, you notice I called it Ultramarine Ocean Action Summit. I feel like too much talk, no action doesn't do us any good at all. And sometimes we get stuck. Sometimes we say we're going to do something, and then maybe we run out of money, or maybe somebody died or whatever. But can you build a community to find ways to help each other and to build something up? And so I think that's where this really takes a turn. What we've built at Ultramarine is about community. If I get stuck somewhere, I've got somebody I can call in 2 clicks, and someone will rise to the occasion.
You've done some video projects. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So a while back, I did a little project called Ridge to Reef. And it was one of the first. It was the first EarthX film things I think that happened here in Dallas. It was in coordination with EarthX. A good friend of mine, Michael McKane, said, "Hey, do you have anything that you want to put into a film festival?" I said, "Well, I have something I'm working on, but it's not it's not there just yet." He goes, "Well, if it matures, let me know. It would be good to have whatever you're working on." So, as it would have, I had 3 episodes that we showed at EarthX Film, and the concept was called Ridge to Reef, and we basically took video footage and stories from places all around the world of people who are doing really impactful things. It was just another form of storytelling. Yeah. Outside of that, video wise, I've used it for art installations. I've got a new art installation that's coming to Miami Art Basel this year. It has to do with live data. It has to do with some video that I'm working with. It's going to be inside of a planetarium. And the entire thing will actually change each time a human or a person walks in. So the way that we do this is that we gather real-time data. It's projected on different types of abstract ways onto the planetarium. And when you walk in, your Bluetooth ID on your phone will actually, we won't know it's you per se, but we'll know that someone has come in the room. And each time another person and another person and another person, the system starts to degrade. Because again, like I said before, when humans enter into the marine environment, we have a way of taking away from it rather than adding to. And so you'll actually slowly see this thing regenerate and disconnect. And then we've got an amazing, I'm going to not say who he is just yet, but a Grammy-nominated artist who is making music that will only be heard when the right amount of people are there. So for instance, if you, me, and another person were there, our 3 IDs would pick the certain stems from the music. So that music would be only unique for the 3 of us. If someone else came in, then the music would change, and so on and so forth. So as you go into this installation, these videos and these abstract visuals that you see and hear will only exist at that particular time. You could come back 100 times and have a completely different experience.
At the top of the podcast, when you were explaining how that informs
that was my stomach grumbling. Sorry about that. I have no idea.
Sure. I thought it was an 18-wheeler.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like.
No, but at the top of the podcast, you talked about how the art can influence someone and put them in a position to think about it in the way that resonates with them more meaningfully versus being told what to think. And it just strikes me that is, of course, the answer. I mean, that's how you get people on board. But listening to you describe the way in which you do it seems so ingenious, and it's just really incredible. So I congratulate you.
That's nice of you to say. I just feel like we live, oddly enough, I remember growing up watching the news, and it was Peter Jennings, and it seemed like whatever Peter Jennings said was the truth. right? Yep. And nowadays, I don't know what I'm watching. And so I kind of want to just separate the weed from the weeds, basically. Yeah. Wait, not the weed, the wheat from the weeds. You can separate the weed from the weeds if you want to. But I just feel like if we could come up with a way to present information to people and they can draw their own conclusions, that's the best way to do it.
We could talk for a really long time, Jeremy. I love your stories. I love the work that you're doing. I want to catch one last story from you and talk about the Pegasus.
That was a fun project.
And that's completed now. Yep. Quick story on that.
Yep. So I was doing an install at the McKinney Avenue Contemporary Museum, my underwater photos. It was June Mattingly, who was the curator. And as I'm hanging my work, she's telling me a story about her dad, or her daddy, as she used to say. She goes, my daddy built the Pegasus. I said, is that right? And I let her kind of carry on and tell the story. And she always talked about the Pegasus and her dad in such endearment. And about 5-10 minutes in, she talks about how it was lost. I said, what do you mean it was lost? She's like, well, they don't know where it is.
She goes, the Pegasus is this, what is it, like a stainless steel?
Well, the Pegasus is a sign that was never meant to be permanent here in Dallas. It was put up on top of the Magnolia Building in 1934, and it was there for, I believe it was a convention. I'm running it's been a minute since I've worked on this project, but it stayed up there, and it became really the icon of what we believe is Dallas, Texas. I mean, you don't have to go too far downtown to see a Pegasus somewhere, and that's who we are. If somebody says, well, not too many places have a logo. Does New York have a logo? I don't think so. Does LA have a logo? Maybe, but everyone knows the Pegasus is the logo of Dallas.
And so there's a process of finding it.
Well, so
it was lost.
I just said that's ridiculous, June. I said how they can't. They're not. They didn't lose it. It's just whoever you're talking to just doesn't know. So I started asking some questions around, and well, sure enough, nobody knew where it was. They thought it was in Farmer's Market, and it hadn't been there for years. I went to go talk to some guy there, and he said, yeah, no, we had it here, but it got moved to this place, and there wasn't any paper trail. And so that was right around the time that I reached out to Kay Callos from the Office of Cultural Affairs. And, she confirmed the story and everything. And I said, well, Kay, I want to find it. We got to find it. And, of course, Kay humored me, and she and I got along really well. And we started kind of asking around town. I'd make calls, she'd make calls, and a lot of dead ends. And then one day, Kay calls me up. She goes, Jeremy, I think we might have a lead. This one makes sense. He goes, you should definitely bring your camera just in case. And I was like, okay. And so we go out to this place. It's a city facility over by White Rock Lake. And it's this old shed that's got God knows what in it. I mean, there were paint buckets in there, somebody's tractor. I mean, it was just the most weirdest place to have, the icon of Dallas. I mean, this is like, so anyway, so we open this thing up, and I've got this video of us kind of rolling film, and there's this big box that comes out, and then all we see in there is just neon tubes. That's it. And then I remember somebody saying, well, did someone steal it? No, it's got to be here somewhere. And and those tubes are for something else. So we look over, and there's this little thin box, and we're like, well, what's in that box? And so we undo it, and then the first panel comes up, and there's styrofoam in between, and the styrofoam just falls down, and there's this bright, bright red. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about this, right? Because it was the first time I ever felt, I always wanted to be Indiana Jones. Maybe that's why I agreed to be an Explorers Club member, because I wanted to be Indiana Jones. This was my moment to be Indiana Jones, right? And so I remember hearing, there it is, and Kay and I immediately started talking about what could we do to restore it. We actually met this really wonderful human being. His name is Michael Van Enter, and he found the most easiest way to get kind of the aging off of the Pegasus. And so at the time, my mentor was Jeff West, who worked at Matthews Southwest. And, I had been working on the Omni Hotel. We put in 7,000 original works of art by 145 local Dallas artists. Good. And I was like, hey, Jeff, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think we found the Pegasus. This is before I went on that venture with Kay that day. And he says, well, let me know, if you do find it, like, this could be a big deal. We could put this on the property. So I said, okay. Of course, it was just the panels, right? So I told June about this and everything. June Mattingly was just tickled pink. She was so excited about this. So we get this thing out, and we thought, okay, well, if we're going to move this, let's set the record straight. Let's do it how it should have been done from the beginning. And Kay from the Office of Cultural Affairs put together a piece of paper saying that it was here, and it's now going over here. And there's insurance. Like, we just wanted to have a proper paper trail. And so I actually had to license. I forget the actual term in there, but I actually had to take possession of the Pegasus. So I don't think it meant I owned it, but I felt very honored to be able to move this thing throughout town. And it sat in this warehouse for a little bit as we were trying to figure out how to do it. And then I called Tony Collins, because I had been working with him on the Omni project. And I was really impressed with Tony Collins and his capabilities to, build things. And so he designed the armature that would rotate. Now, the armature that's on top of the Magnolia now, the bearings are actually exposed to the elements, which is why it doesn't rotate anymore. You can go up there and fix it now, but then just as soon as it starts raining and it rusts again, it's going to stop again. So he came up with basically what looks like a gigantic skateboard bearing, where it's all in case, water's not getting in there, so that thing can continue to turn. And so we wanted to have the kind of same look and feel as the armature as you would have on top of the Magnolia. But Jeff West was really the visionary in this. I told him, I said, because Jack and I were all working together, and I said, hey, do me a favor, though. I said, I don't know how this thing's going to go. Don't tell Jack anything. Because I know Jeff. Jeff was like, whoa, I think we're going to do this thing. I said, just don't. So I come back and I told him, here's the video. Here's what we found. He's like, amazing. He's, by the way, Jack thinks this is a great idea. I said, Jeff, you had one job, not to tell Jack. He goes, I know. He goes, but now you have motivation to succeed. And that was Jeff. Jeff unfortunately passed away May of 2012.
I read about that.
And he wasn't able, to really kind of to be there. And this became kind of a, it was it was one of those things that we said, well, we're doing this because of Jeff, and of course, June Mattingly got to see it up there before, she passed away. But what Jeff, I told him, I said, Jeff, I don't think it's appropriate to put the Pegasus here at the Omni. He says, why not? I said, well, because you got all these bright lights and has nothing to do with, the story of the Pegasus. He's like, no. He goes, this is the first building in downtown Dallas to have these kinds of lights. These lights were not even meant to be on the outside. We figured out a way to make them work on the outside. And we put video, we could do all kinds of... So the Pegasus was the first beam of light when people were coming to Dallas. He goes, it's old lights meets new lights. And that particular site, you happen to look up and you can see the other Pegasus. So that was his idea. I didn't want people knowing about what we were doing because I wanted this to be a surprise to the people of Dallas. And so even when we talk about it in emails, we never refer to, we just said, we called her Miss Peggy. And so, we would say, oh yeah, well, Miss Peggy's over here. Well, Miss Peggy's going to be over here. And so we try to keep it code named. A couple people got upset because, well, it should be a male. It should be a man. And I was like, well, I don't know. I don't know whether it's a male or female. I just know that we called her Miss Peggy.
Man, I am so grateful you came on the show. You're a fantastic storyteller, and you've led an amazing life. So I really appreciate you coming in and sharing. Just so fascinating what you're doing.
Well, thanks for having me. I mean, I like, in Hawaii, they have a phrase called talking story, which I love doing. Maybe that's why I was like, yeah, sure. You want to sit around and talk about the good old stories for a while? I'm happy to do that anytime.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
I appreciate it. I called my friend Carl Chow in Dallas, and I said, Carl, we're coming to Dallas. We're delivering some adaptive bikes and making some business presentations, and we want to do a podcast. Can you recommend anyone? And we're looking for someone that's, really kind of interesting. Man, did he deliver. He lined up Jeremy McKane. And Jeremy just told the most fascinating stories, as you just heard. And he's just so interesting. I didn't even look down at my notes one time because he just kept going. But it's one thing to be a storyteller, but when you start to integrate accents and impersonations into your stories, it just brought so much color and excitement to it. I was just giddy with that conversation. Great pleasure to meet Jeremy. Wish him continued success in all he does. And we appreciate him coming into Cumberland Hill for the podcast. We appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur Podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.